Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Art of Flow with me, the Night Shadow, your professional glover. No, I'm just kidding. Not a professional. I just like to help people out with these tips and tricks and going over these concepts that we're learning in this series, right? So, today we're going to be covering dials and digits, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do with dials and digits, and that you can incorporate to your shows, add to your inventory, know how to use these moves, and how to expand your knowledge on this art form, right? So dials are a pretty easy concept to explain. They're really not that hard to do. You're basically just stacking your fingers on top of the other. You can have like just a single dial. You can do double dials, right? You can do double dials with both hands. So it's a pretty basic concept, right? You're just turning your fingers. It's not hard to do. The thing is, you gotta figure out how to really use them in your shows. How much variety you can get out of dials. And they go hand in hand with digits as well. That's why you will see a lot of people covering them together, because they go along pretty much. And you can combine those two, right? You can be doing a lot of dial stuff with digits. There's a lot of stuff you can add. There's a lot more variety you can add to finger tutting as well with digits. It's just learning how to practice your finger dexterity, and we're going to be going over some of that today. So dials, right? Dials are pretty good way and a pretty cool beginner concept to get into. The thing I would definitely recommend to do is practicing isolating certain fingers and practice moving around those, like isolating one finger and then moving the other one around it. Like, let's say you want to isolate your index finger, so you will be just moving kind of like your middle finger towards it, right? Right now I can't really do it that well, but basically you're just isolating that point, right? And you want to be just practicing that in the mirror as well, just making sure you're consciously isolating one finger so your moves look cleaner as you execute them in a show, right? I wouldn't really be doing this in a show, but it's a good exercise to practice and build up your dexterity and your grid mentality, right? Because you want to be isolating certain points in the grid, and not really move away from them unless you're consciously moving from that, right? And you also want to be aware of symmetry in this, right? That's where kind of like my sacred geometry link as well comes into play, because our brain receives these symmetrical patterns and likes symmetrical patterns, and you're working with those illusions as well. So like, let's say you're working with this formation, you want to keep your patterns kind of like in a symmetrical way to give them that look, right? That clean look. Here I'm not really doing anything complicated. I'm just doing dials, right? You can do a lot of things with certain dials. You can be stacking them. You can be doing finger rolls with your dials. You can be doing some finger tutting stuff with your dials. You can be doing digits with dials. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but the thing is understanding how to incorporate it. And basically a dial is just you're doing a circle motion with your hands, like a mini circle, right? Like flails, you're doing like a big circle with your hand and arm. Here you're just doing like a mini circle with your fingers. Another thing that comes to play with dials would be clusters, because clusters, you're isolating certain points on the grid, right? And you want to be aware of those points when you do them. and that comes hand in hand with dials. I'm not really going to be covering clusters. If you really want to look into clusters, there's a lot of good videos out there, but that's more advanced stuff. It's really hard to do, honestly. I haven't really gotten to that yet. There's some other stuff that I'm working on before I really get down with the clusters, you know what I mean? Like, I just been delaying it because it's one of those moves where it's like it takes a lot of practice, it strains your hands, and you gotta be really aware of where your points are in the grid, right? So basically with dials, right, you can be combining dials with finger rolls, you can be combining dials with digits, right? You can be combining dials, you know, be like you're doing some dials right here, then you can turn them into, you know, a finger tutting structure. Then you can continue to do dials somewhere else. There's a lot of stuff you can incorporate with just simple dials. Like I said, some people just teach this move right here, where you have your fingers kind of cross. Then you go into like basic dials. You just dial all your fingers, right? This is where I'm at, just dialing my fingers. And then you just kind of like stack them together, and then you can unstack them, stack them, unstack them, move it in another way, then stack them again, you know. So this is a cool move that I learned with just simple dials, where you can just be stacking fingers and then return to your original position. It's a pretty simple move, so you can rewind it and see it again. But yeah, you're basically just stacking your fingers into dials, switching the position, and then you're back at the beginning, right? Your fingers are just interlaced, right? There's also this version of it where you can do that, and then you can move it right here, and then you can go back to your original position, right? So you can be stacking dials, you can be doing all sorts of stuff with dialing motions. You just have to like kind of look at how people do their dials, basically. But there's a lot of stuff you can do. Dials are not really just done by themselves. It's basically you're putting something else involved with that dial, right? It's usually used a lot with finger tutting, and you can basically find other ways to move around the grid with dials. So it's pretty, it's a pretty basic concept to know if you're trying to build up your dexterity and your variety in your moves. So that's dials. So now digits. Digits is basically just bending at your first knuckle, right? Because you have two knuckles, so you're bending right here. And you want to keep that isolated, right? A good thing to do is practice each finger individually. And there's some things with digits, right? Some people can't really digit all their fingers because of the way your tendons are in your hands. So if you can't just digit your fingers, some fingers, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. That's why I really don't use this hand for digits, right? Because my pinky finger is kind of like connected to my ring finger on this hand. So I kind of can't really do them cleanly without like moving one other finger, right? Like if I try to digit with my pinky, my ring finger kind of like comes down, and it's really painful to just keep it up like that or like execute it in a show very cleanly. So if this happens to you, don't worry about it. All of us are different, right? We have different body anatomy. So I mainly use this hand because this hand I can kind of like do it better without really messing up or it looking too bad. But as well, this one is kind of like still connected as well, but I can kind of do it better than my other hand, right? My dominant hand. So with digits, you want to practice that. You also want to practice doing it together, right? Like this would be a position, right? Your fingers all closed, then all stretched out. Then you go to the first knuckle, right? You go to the first knuckle and then all extended out. And then you want to go back to the first knuckle, all extended out, down, and then close, right? You want to just be practicing that a lot. That way you can get your finger dexterity up and you can be doing digits a lot cleaner, a lot better, and it helps you with your dexterity, right? Another thing that really helps with finger dexterity is one thing I learned from dynamics is doing this exercise, right? You open up your fingers like this and then you try to stack them one by one. So you start with your pinky, right, to your ring, then to your middle, then to your index, and you go right back, and then you do it reverse, right? You do it with your index finger first. Again, I can't really do it too well, but I practice this a lot just so I can build my finger dexterity up and I can move one finger independently from the others. But with digits, there's a lot of stuff you can do. Like I said, you can combine them with dials, right? You can be doing dials with digits. Let's say you're doing a dial right here, then you're doing a dial right there, right? You can be moving this over here, do a dial over there, dial these fingers, pull the other ones out, dial again, pull them all out, go back to digiting. Or you can be doing this, you know, going from stack to stack, depending on which finger you want to dial in. A lot of other good things that you can do with digits is pass-throughs, right? So pass-throughs is just moving one hand in the space that you created while doing digits, right? You can do just a simple one-digit pass-through through each finger. You can be doing two-finger pass-throughs. This one is a really common one where you just switch digits between your ring finger and your middle, right? A good thing to keep in mind with pass-throughs is that you want to be keeping one hand still while the other one passes through. You can be switching hands, right? Be switching which hand you move, but one hand wants to be stationary, right? You don't want to be moving both at the same time. This might look somewhat cool, right? But you want to be given that illusion, right? That point is still in the grid. So you want to be moving one finger at a time. You can also do them like this, right? You can be turning them. Still same thing, right? You're just doing digits. And just passing the other hand through that hole, right? Another thing you can do, you can be doing digits and be combining them in your finger tutting structures. It gives you a lot more variety and dynamic when you're doing finger tutting with digits. It just gives you like a lot more range, I guess. Like it gives you more structures to work with. I always see people doing like sort of this thing. Not really good at doing digits with finger tutting, but they do some sort of thing like that. Or you can combine digits and like fully extended fingers like I have over here. Then you can be doing all sorts of your finger movements. And it looks cool, right? Because you have another set of points, right? You can have that point, this point, this point. You add like more points that you can work with digits. And again, you can be combining the dials that we talked about into your finger tutting routines or moves. And it gives you a lot more ways to move around the grid because it's a different sort of move, right? You're adding different points. Instead of just doing fully extended stuff, right? You can be doing little isolations or opening up new structures. You can get really technical with digits and dials. I haven't really practiced too much with digits aside from doing like dials or pass-throughs. But once you get really comfortable with isolating each finger and comfortable at doing digits, then you can be adding them to your finger tutting routines, and it just looks better, and you can be doing like a lot more stuff, right? It opens up a lot more patterns that you can be using with that. Another thing that you can do digits with would be like scales. I'm not really good at scales, but you're basically like manipulating each point, like each finger, so they can be touching one point of the grid. A good video that I would recommend for scales, if you want to get into that, it's a more advanced move, would be Throw Lights. They have a good digit scales video, but that's basically, like I said, more advanced like that. And clusters are going to be some of the last moves you really work on, because if you kind of rush into getting into clusters or what was the other one, scales, you're not really going to be really good at it. You might get the basics of them down, but I would recommend learning all the other concepts that we talked about in my series, and more of the basic ones like finger rolls and liquid, before you move on into the more intricate stuff like clusters and scales. But you move at your own pace. I'm not saying you can't be learning them. I'm just recommending you to figure out digits and dials before you jump into clusters and scales, because that all leads to clusters and scales in the long run. But once you get comfortable with your dials and your digits, then you can kind of move into the more techie things like clusters and scales. I wouldn't say it's necessary for you to learn those, but once you've been gloving long enough, you're going to want to move to more advanced stuff, and that gives way to clusters and dials. Once you've mastered clusters and scales, once you learn your dials and your digits and the different things you can do with those, right? So be practicing different pass-throughs, be practicing the scale exercise, right? What I said, be isolating, them at your first knuckle, then all the way out, down, all the way out, first knuckle, extended. That's going to give you a good, it's going to be getting you more acquainted to how your fingers are going to move in this motion, right? Because this is not like a normal motion that your hand does. And your hand might hurt a little bit once you begin practicing those. Not really with dials. Dials are pretty easy. They don't really hurt your fingers. But once you get those dialed in, then you can start getting into the more intricate stuff, and your hands and fingers are going to be used to that movement that you're going to be doing, right? So yeah, guys, there's a lot of stuff you can cover with dials. And digits. Just gotta be practicing each thing individually, right? And like I said, remember your grid mentality, that you're basically putting a point out into your grid, right? This is still a point, even though it's little, right? You can just be working with little points. With digits, it's still the same thing. You want to be remembering those points that are isolated on the grid. And like I said, you want to be doing a lot of stacking stuff, keeping everything symmetrical, geometrical, right? And working with different structures that you can build with digits, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do with just digits and dials that are pretty simple to do. You can be combining them, like I said, into your finger rolls. I like to do this gun motion where I just have my hand stretched out and I'm just shooting each finger into a digit. You can be doing dials in between your digits, right? you can be doing like isolating that point, you know, opening it up. You can also be doing poking stuff with dials. Poking stuff is just like basically poking a finger in between each space. You can have double pokes, you can have triple pokes, you can have your whole hand poking, and you can be doing dials with your poking as well, right? You can be switching it in between. You can bring it that way. You can basically have this structure here, do double dials there. There's a lot of stuff you can cover with just dials, right? You just gotta know how many different ways you can, you know, figure out how to do dials in. There's a lot of stuff you can find in light shows where people be using dials in their own creative way. It comes down to your own creativity. Dials aren't really that hard to do, but they come with a finger dexterity, and once you learn how to do those with digits, then your moveset becomes a lot more stocked, right? You're going to be able to do a lot more stuff and get a lot more technical, get a lot more flair in your shows like we talked about. And basically, like I said, keep in mind of keeping some fingers isolated, right? You can be doing double dials as well. Like you don't only have to be doing them with one finger. You can be doing them with 3 fingers as well. I'm not really that good at that. Or with 4 fingers. It just comes down to knowing all the concepts and how they work. But basically, you can combine them into anything you really want to. Even liquid, right? You can be doing liquid and be doing dials at the same time with just 2 fingers. So with dials, there's a lot of stuff you can really add to that, because it's its own concept, but you basically combine it with all the other stuff, right? Kind of hard to put into words, like most of gloving stuff, but there's a lot of examples that we covered in this video, so you can get like an idea and get the ball rolling to create your own moves. See where you can go with dials, and remember symmetry, grid mentality, and isolations, right? We're going to be going over isolations more in the next video, and that comes useful with your tutting, finger tutting, dials, not really with your liquid or finger rolls, but it serves you with that other stuff, right? And clusters, if you're trying to learn clusters, because you're definitely isolating points on the grid, and you want to be aware of those points and that you keep those points still when you're doing clusters. So a lot of ways to do clusters. You don't really have to do that. This could be a cluster, right? And you're just isolating each point on the grid, knowing how to move around them. But we're going to be going over isolations more in the next video. I just wanted to talk about dials real quick. There's other videos you can YouTube about dials and digits. But basically, I taught you how to do them, what to focus on, and different ways that you can be combining them into your shows. And dials are very easy to do, so I would recommend you take the time to figure out some moves that you can do with dials, because they look pretty cool. You can also be doing like dials where you turn your whole hand. I don't know if I covered this already, but you can be, you know, turning your dial all the way around. Gives you more range when you do your wrist movement when you're doing your dial, right? It just gives you a lot more turn. Instead of just doing this, you can be moving your whole hand, and it gives you more motion. So yeah, just practice that, guys. Be practicing in the mirror as well, so you can see those points in the grid, and practicing where you can go with doing dial movements, right? Like I said, just be practicing and be noticing your points on the grid and where you can really put your dials in, and what ways you can do your dials into, right? Doesn't really have to be just a normal dial. You can be incorporating them into a lot more things. But that comes with watching examples, watching light shows, and practicing yourself and figuring out what moves you can really do with dials. But it's a basic, it's essential knowledge that you should really know. And digits as well, because you want to learn the range of motions that your fingers can do, and that brings up new gestures for your finger tutting. That brings out new points that you can be working with in the grid, that you can be moving to, and gives you a lot more finger dexterity, right? So finger dexterity exercises that I listed, be doing those in your free time so you can get your finger dexterity up and you can become a gloving master, right? Anyways, guys, I think that's about as deep as I want to go with dials and digits. Hope you guys learned something in this video. And I'll be bringing you a new video of isolations here soon. This has been the Night Shadow. Continue with your flow. Anyways, guys, see you on the next episode and have a good day.